The Gundam Card Game start decks are finally out, but which one should you pick up? Whether you're looking for a deck that plays well right out of the box, or something with long-term potential once the first booster set drops, I've got you covered. Alright, let's kick things off with Start Deck 1, Heroic Beginnings. With this deck, don't worry too much about rushing your opponent's bases and shields early. That'll happen naturally as you build up your board and start trading efficiently. Your main Gundam has Repair 2, which helps you trade better, and Gundam Aerial Permix Score 6 can clear out bigger threats without going 1-for-1. What's awesome about both of these cards is that their effects activate when they're paired, not just when they're linked to their matching pilots. That gives you way more flexibility when building your board. Gundam MA form is another standout in the start deck meta. In a format where card draw is pretty limited, this becomes a solid way to cycle, assuming you've already got this on board. Amura Ray is also kinda cracked. Resting an enemy unit opens up two plays. First, you can now swing into it. Remember, in this game, you can only attack rested units or bases. Second, you can rest their blockers and go straight for the base or pressure other units. Super versatile card. One of the biggest issues with start decks is that you'll often have more resources than cards to actually use them on. That's where something like White Base really shines. It gives you a good place to dump those extra resources and keep your tempo going. Overall, Heroic Beginnings is all about building a strong board and maintaining control through efficient trades and consistent value. The command cards in this deck might not be flashy, but they each give you just a little edge. That incremental value adds up fast and helps you stay ahead on board, which is exactly where you want to be in a format like this. For a start deck, this one's definitely one of the most well-rounded and competitive right out of the box. Now we're moving from one of the stronger start decks to probably one of the weakest. Wings of Advance has some really powerful individual units, but the overall deck just doesn't feel like it comes together that well. The main game plan here is to drop big, impactful units in the mid to late game and force your opponents to deal with them. Wing Gundam is definitely a standout. It's one of those strong, splashable green cards that will likely see play in future decks as well. The ability to clear active enemy units, once your opponent might have kept back thinking they're safe, is huge. Pair that with Breach 5, now you're also threatening their shields every time it swings. And just a quick note, currently in the game, no bases have more than 5 health, so this thing deletes any base cards instantly. Tallgeese looks great on paper, one of the few units in the game that can attack twice in a turn, but in practice it's a little slow and clunky by itself. In the best case scenario, you use it to trade into 2 separate units, or attack once and leave it active as a threat your opponent has to respect. That said, Tallgeese gets much better when it's linked to Zack's Marquise. Not only can you take out threats more efficiently, but you also get to draw a card whenever you do. Ideally, you want to play both of them in the same turn, otherwise Tallgeese might get removed before you can do anything. If you've played any card game before, Wing Gundam Bird Mode is basically your ramp card, but it's actually a bit better than simple ramp. Since your resource count also determines your level in the game, playing this on turn 3 while going second means you could potentially drop Wing Gundam the very next turn. That tempo jump can be huge. And finally, I've gotta say I really like Gundam Heavy Arms. It's a clean answer to those annoying blockers your opponent might be keeping active to protect their most valuable units. A lot of times your opponent might choose to value block, even if they're left with only 1 health each. That can seem smart in the moment, but Heavy Arms punishes that kind of play hard. It's a great way to swing tempo back in your favor and open up clean attacks with your bigger units. So while Wings of Advance isn't as cohesive as some of the other start decks, it definitely brings some heavy hitters to the table. You've got strong individual units that can swing games if used right, and there are tools here to help you make an impact, whether that's by preventing damage to your shields, tapping down key enemy units, or dropping big threats your opponent can't afford to ignore. It may take a bit more setup to get things rolling, but once you do, this deck can put serious pressure on the board. Next up is Start Deck 3 Zeon's Rush, which is the closest thing we got right now to a true aggro deck. This one's all about flooding the board with low-cost units early on and overwhelming your opponent before they have time to set up their game plan. The low-level vanilla units might not look like much on their own, but when you swarm the board with a bunch of them, it adds up fast. One of the absolute best units in this deck, and honestly one of the best in the game right now, is Zaku 2. This is one of the few cards I'd actually consider using my EX resource on early just to get it down right away. It lets you immediately remove your opponent's EX base and opens the door to start chipping away at their other shields with your swarm of smaller units. I really like the support mechanic in this deck. Since you can use it the same turn you deploy a unit, it lets your smaller attacks hit harder, sometimes even enough to take out a base in one shot. Charged Zaku 2 is a standout card here. In a deck loaded with Zeon and Neo Zeon units, Charged Zaku rewards your aggressive playstyle while keeping your hand from running dry. As you push damage, your opponent is going to try stabilizing with bulkier units, and that's when Char helps you refill and keep the pressure on. Even in a fast aggro deck, you still need a top-end threat to help close out games, and that's where Sinanju comes in. An unblockable unit when your opponent's down to their last few shields is absolutely terrifying. And if that wasn't enough, it also pings something for 2 damage after swing, making cleanup on the following turn even easier. Full Frontal might not be at its strongest in this specific list, but make no mistake, cheating cards into play is always dangerous, and in future builds, this is the kind of card that can enable some pretty nasty turns. This is probably the easiest deck to pilot out of all the starters, but that doesn't mean there's no skills involved. Timing your aggression, knowing which units to target, and planning around future turns are all key to playing it well. You've got plenty of token generators to keep the board full, and when this deck hits its stride, it becomes a serious problem for anyone on the other side of the table. And now we're on to the last but probably the best start deck of the bunch, Start Deck 4 Sea Trek. This deck is easily the most versatile out of the 4. It can play aggressively when needed, but it really shines in how well it can control the game through bounce effects and by reducing your opponent's unit's AP. Out of all the LRs, I'd say AO Strike Gundam is the most busted. Not only is it a massive blocker, but it also bounces enemy units. That's a huge tempo swing, especially against decks that rely on a few big plays. You're forcing them to replay that unit next turn without actually advancing their board. Hawk of Endymion is another solid bounce option. It helps you stall until you draw into your key pieces, or it can be used offensively to bounce a blocker and open the path to chip away at shields. I also really like Archangel in this deck. It lets you go in on your turn while still keeping a blocker back afterwards. Iga's Gundam is another threat that helps you get on board relatively early on in the game. When it's paired with Atherin Zala, it lets you attack standing units and then deal with another threat using its effect. It's a great way to start controlling the field and make your opponent think twice about leaving anything untapped. Honestly, I think the MA form might even be better in this deck than its regular form. Reach 3 lets you deal meaningful shield damage while still trading favorably, which helps you push tempo while staying in control. And don't sleep on Striker Pack. It may have a simple effect, but it's surprisingly clutch. Being able to choose between a 2-4 or a 4-2 blocker gives you the flexibility to adapt to the board state in real time. Plus, the burst effect is huge. It gives you an emergency blocker when your opponent tries to flood the board and go wide. This card is a lifesaver against aggro decks like Zeon's Rush that are trying to storm you down. All in all, C-Strike stands out as the most well-rounded and consistent start deck. While the others may specialize in aggro or big finishers, this one gives you options. You can go aggressive when the opportunity presents itself, or shift gears and control the pace with bounce effects, AP reduction, and smart blockers. The deck is packed with flexible tools that lets you respond to different board states and maintain momentum, and that's what makes it arguably the strongest deck straight out of the box. So that's all the start decks currently available. If I had to rank them based on how they perform straight out of the box, I'd go with C-Strike on the top, followed by Heroic Beginnings, then Zeon's Rush, and finally Wings of Advance. Honestly, the top 3 are pretty close in overall power level, but Wings of Advance just feels like it lacks a clear game plan to keep up. That said, every one of these decks is worth picking up, especially if you're planning to upgrade them later. There's definitely meta potential across the board. As a first step, I recommend picking up 2 copies of whichever deck you like to get a full playset of the LRs. What do you all think about the Gundam card game so far? I've been having a blast with it, and I was genuinely surprised by how much depth there is with just the start decks. Do you agree with my rankings? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you all next time.